Courtney felt her footing slip as the ground suddenly quaked. She lost hold of her last pine cone as she tried to grab at any protrusion that could save her from falling. Hitting the hard stone, she let out a shriek. Something snapped. Pain flared out along her right arm and shoulder as she rolled down towards the open area of the main courtyard. All around her, mages fell to the ground and covered their heads and ears. It was as if some kind of supersonic sound had brought them to their knees. From the masses, one fallen stumbled free. It sniffed towards the far wall where Tyler had kicked a dagger at the beginning of the battle. The blonde mage watched the creature as it snuffled around with its nose, unable to stop it. It somehow found the weapon and took it in its teeth. It settled the blade between two crags of stone, so the sharp end pointed upward. With an almost manic look in its eyes, it thrust its paw down onto the blade. A scream of pain and rage filled the air, causing Kira to smile. It was about time. She turned towards the sound of the anguish and saw a pillar of swirling ash. She knew the ash had once been Josef. A sacrifice had to be made after all, and since Daphne was dead, there was nothing left for that body to live for. It had been a kindness, really. She bent back down, scribbling symbols on the stone shelf she'd stood on through the whole ordeal. The circle was almost complete, and she finished it with a flourish of scrawls and ancient lettering. When she was finished, she moved back, taking care not to smudge the lines. The whirlwind of ash continued to move upward. It coalesced into a flying funnel of energy as it moved across the sky. It no longer touched the ground as it flew towards her. It drew the attention of the two mages fighting just below her. Margo stared in horror as the dark matter centered on the shelf above her and her foe. Why had she not noticed the girl's presence there?
No!
She put her hands out in defiance, her blade falling from her fingers. Anwen stumbled into the door as the mountain shook. Something had happened outside, she was sure, though she didn't have any idea what. Under the press of her weight, the doors creaked open, dumping her onto the floor. Dust flew up into the air as she hit the ground. The fine particles made her cough, and it took some moments before she could bring it under control. When she looked up, she gasped in surprise. There was no need for a light orb here. Not that she was sure she could conjure another one anyway. Energy pulsed like a lamp, spreading uneven light across the expanse. Standing, she accidentally sent a stone skittering across the floor. The resulting echo filled the vast space before her. Massive pillars held up the ceiling where the living crystal pulsed like a heart. The still forms of dragons lined the length of the seemingly endless hall. There were more than she'd be able to count in a lifetime, and she felt there were even more that she couldn't see beyond those there. With wide eyes, she stood and stepped further into the space before her. It almost felt like the floor was vibrating underneath her as she moved. The air was thick with expectation. Was she supposed to go to a specific place in the chamber? Or did it matter?
Deep inside these walls they sleep. Only one may enter the keep. Find the heart and speak the word. Only then will your voice be heard.
Taking a deep breath, Anwen continued forward. She headed towards the massive crystal in the center. It felt like it would take forever to reach it. From the ruins of the buildings in the main square, Walter peered out. The quake had rattled him, but he'd managed to stay upright.
What happened? What's going on?
He called out to Tyler. The Dragon Lord faced the peak, his expression grim.
I fear the mages are playing their last dangerous card. This does not bode well.
He looked towards the base of the mountain, lower down from the main gates.
Anwen, you must hurry. You're running out of time.
Something had changed, and he wasn't sure if it was in a good way or not. Then his attention was pulled in another direction. A pillar of ash swirled upwards from near the stone archway. His eyes widened in horror at the realization of what had happened, but he could not bring himself to feel anything more than pity for the soul whose life had been claimed. He turned his attention back to the mountain peak, and his heart almost stopped. Someone stood above the gates, someone who looked a lot like Daphne. He shook his head in denial.
No, it can't be.
Walter moved to look in the same direction his friend did. Though his eyes were not as good, he could still make out the outline of someone standing atop the stone.
Can't be who?
Tyler only shook his head in denial.
It can't be her. She's dead.
The veteran moved to join Tyler, but stopped. Several of the mages were coming out of their shock, and while he wanted to be by his friend, he knew someone had to keep the enemy busy.
Go.
Walter urged.
Do whatever you need to do.
But before Tyler could so much as think about going and stopping the girl, Mr. Millard moved into view.
I know what you are.
he called out to the teen.
And even if you try to stop what's going on up there, you won't make it in time.
The Dragon Lord focused his attention on the man. This was the person responsible for Anwen's father's death. This was the man who had hunted down Keeper after Keeper. Not only had he hunted them down, but he'd killed them for no other reason than to keep the mountains sealed. This man had caused enough death and suffering. White-hot anger filled his breast.
It was you!
Tyler's eyes took on a steely quality as he stared the man down.
You will pay for what you've done to Anwen.
With that, he lunged himself at the male mage. Kira crowed in triumph as Joseph's ashes spun inside the circle she'd made with blood and dragon ashes. And now the ashes of a mortal were trapped inside, compressing into a long, thin shape. The blackened material absorbed the circle. It seemed to draw the material into itself as the metallic darkness glowed like a heated forge. There was nothing anyone could do to stop her now. The spell was all but complete. No more incantations were necessary at this stage. The ashes need only continue to harden. They compressed themselves like folded steel in a forge, and the resulting weapon could strip the soul from any living flesh. From below, Margo shielded her eyes against the glare. She felt the energy surging around the dark shaft.
What have you done?
She turned to her cousin who stood staring in shock. She took the woman by the robes and shook her.
What have you done?
But Madame Millard seemed incapable of answering the question, let alone having a coherent thought. Her eyes were fixated on her niece as the girl raised her arms in victory over the masses below her. She breathed with unbelieving eyes. This wasn't how the spell was supposed to go. Something had definitely gone wrong.